Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for these Untracked Webinars. This is Karma Baughman, along with Ben joining us. Before we get started into what we'll be discussing this morning from the Untracked book, just a couple logistic things if you're not familiar with this platform that we use to do these webinars. On the top right is a moderated chat box. Simply, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, simply at the bottom of that little window on the top right, there's a little send area. Type in your message or question there, click send, and that will come to Ben and I, and we will certainly be glad to respond accordingly. If you'd rather do it verbally, underneath the video is a button that says Ask a Question, and simply click on that. Again, that notifies Ben and I. I'm kind of monitoring that, so I'll make notice of that. Then I will turn the mic over to you, and you can verbally ask a question or share a comment or thought or idea, because we love participation, we love interaction, we love hearing from you, so don't hesitate to do those two options. If you're joining us by phone, you can also participate by pressing *5. That will send me the same notification at our end, and I will turn the mic over to you so you can also share with us. So I think that's it as far as logistics. I don't see any issues with audio coming through, so let's go ahead and get started. This morning we're talking about a chapter called Still Burning. It's the first chapter in part 5 of the book. Part 5 was titled, Where is Google Maps When You Need It? And it's kind of wrapping up the book and giving us, I don't know necessarily direction, but encouraging dialogue. How do we move forward with what we've talked about? The Still Burning chapter, I think, has two aspects to it. One is we certainly hear from Ben's heart on what still burns inside of him, which I think is a message that the world needs to hear. And I've thought that for many years, even when I was was introduced to Ben and Brendan and heard their hearts of moving forward and some of the things we need to ponder and discuss on how to move forward. So we hear from Ben's heart. So that is what still burns in Ben's heart. But just as important is when we ponder about moving forward, I think it has a lot to do with what still burns in our hearts. What is it that we bring to the table? What is it that we bring to our family, to our friends, to our communities that God has placed in our hearts that we can join Jesus in moving forward? So I think there's two aspects to this chapter, and I think that the last part of this chapter where Ben shares thoughts and ideas on how we move forward, what burns in us that will never go away, is part of that plan, if you will. So with that, let me turn it over to Ben, and we'll hear more of his thoughts about Still Burning.
Thank you, Karma. Thank you much. You know, when I look back at this, and I think I wrote this in 2009, and I was just sitting one day. I still recall at least somewhat what was going on that day, and as I was sitting that day, I wanted to write down my focus, and because I realized that I was constantly facing demands from every side, from within the church. Remember, I'm pastoring at this point, and that I'm writing this, and I'm wanting to focus so that I can maintain a focus. I'm wanting to say, what is it that I want? And it wasn't hard to write down my focus, and so I wrote this. I wrote that our resources, money, time, strength, passions, talents, I was just listing the resources as they came to me, be directed in the most effective way possible to the fulfilling of our purpose of joining Jesus in loving and saving the world. Now, before I go too far in that focus, it was very easy for me to write down. I remember that it was like, yes, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to go. But because this has come up from many times since, I think I need to say loving and saving the world go hand in hand to me. They're not two separate things. Saving the world is not just somehow talking them into believing that Jesus Christ was the Savior and the Messiah and the one who came to to somehow, if they believed in him, they could be part of this thing called Christianity. It was loving and saving meant literally those things, that people who needed love, or it, which is all of us, and people that need saving, which is all of us, not believing in that Jesus is the Messiah as much as saving us from the things that keep us from being the best there possibly is as God's children, as this family of God. And so in all of that, I see people loving each other and loving God because of who he is and who he showed us in Jesus he was. And so that focus was very clear to me, and I began to write right away. It didn't take me long to write this chapter. It wasn't something that because at that time I wasn't thinking of it as a chapter to a book anyway. I was just writing these things down. So as I'm writing it, I'm saying, the way we accomplish this now is, and it was frustrating to me because I'm going, I fought this whole idea of how we accomplish it, but I can't seem to get anywhere with this. The way we accomplish this now is through this institutionalizing our resources. So the money, the time, the strengths, the passions, the talents, um, and as a single corporate unit, we're trying to act as God's agent of love in our world. But it doesn't do justice to who all of you are, who all of us are in any way. There's unique people that love differently, that have strengths, and they have these passions, and they have these talents, and and they the world needs the love they give in those very specific ways, but we institutionalize it and we say, what we need is we've got the answer as the institution. We want you to go out and get people, bring them into church. We will get them saved. And it would just frustrate me because I would see these one size fits all programs, our youth groups, our choirs, our Sunday schools, our one Saturday uh, a quarter or one Saturday a year of let's go out and help the community days. We'll clean up the park days or whatever it happened to be, or our planning services for evangelism, or all of those things. And I would look at it and I would say, that's not accomplishing this. It's not seeing our neighbor, and it's not seeing the world in this sense of that they're part of God's family. And he longs to love them and save them from the things that are keeping them from becoming everything they could be. So as I'm looking at it, I'm writing these things down, and I realize that I'm part of this clergy. I know this. It's not just a new thought to me. These are all things that have come out of a long time thinking. And as I'm looking at it, um, I'm wanting to join Jesus and realizing that I'm being stopped by the institution. Now, not because it intends to stop me or it's trying to stop me or it's saying, and we don't believe in you joining Jesus and loving and saving the world. Instead, it's just saying, this is the way we do that. And here it is. And the institution itself uh, was using all kinds of models. They were talking, and they were saying the best way to do that is we'll invite them in. And that was called the invitational model of church growth. We invite people to come to church. And that created a fair amount of guilt, and it wasn't working as we hoped it would, so we kept refining it, and we moved to the invitational attractional model, which is probably better put as just attractional model, but it has the invitation as part of it. But that model is what we still practice, or still practiced in the church today, and its goal is, how do we get people into the building? How do we get them to our services where we can preach to them, where we can worship, where we can attract them to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And even the way we look at that is this rather interesting thing where then it is, how do we keep the institution alive? And we support the benefits package. We support this attractional model that is a place we want to come, and whoever has the best worship and the best preaching and the best music and the best programs attracts the best, and the best facilities, the most comfortable, the best coffee to be served that morning, whatever it happens to be. Um, and we we spend all of our resources on that. So here's all this wonderful money that we have and talent that we have, and we're saying with all of it, we need to spend it here so that we can survive and attract people in this world. And it would just be frustrating to me. And as I'm writing this down, I'm realizing how difficult it is because I remember a pastor. I've been a pastor for a lot of years, so it's become my source of income. It's become, and it's frustrating to me because everything inside of me is wanting to say, all I want to do is move everything to a different model altogether. A model that says we're really joining Jesus. We're removing our reliance and dependency on the institutions, on the buildings, the services, and the programs as the means of accomplishing our purpose. What's our purpose again? It's joining Jesus in loving and saving the world. And we're going to dismantle those. And what are we going to do is we dismantle them so that we can give the corporate life to the common purpose. I want to give the corporate life to the common purpose. I don't want to have the corporate life be what it centers around so that you come inside, because that's where we have Jesus. He's inside there somehow. So foreign to everything he did, so foreign to everything he taught us, that somehow people have to come inside to find him. That they need to be in there because that's where the programs that somehow give Jesus to them are. And it seems so foreign. So it seems to me, and as I wrote this, it was like this simple thing that said our mode of operation must start with every person living out their God design, fulfilling the unique calling to them by God's Spirit in their spirit, to do their part to make earth more like heaven. And as I looked at it, even this week, I still read insider articles because obviously I've been there for a lot of years, and I have favorite authors that I read, and one of my favorites who writes a blog is a fellow named Tom Schultz. It's Thom instead of just Tom. So, and he has uh, a blog post on holysoup.com. And so I'll say it again, holysoup.com. And this week, he is, by the way, the founder of Group Publishing, which is one of the largest evangelical publishers for materials for churches and so on in the world. But he is very much at the forefront of wanting the church to be in the world, doing, loving, and caring just as Jesus would. And he's doing it from inside, where I was forever as well. But I want you to listen to just this week as his new post this week, and it goes to a blog post, or I shouldn't say a blog post, a podcast that he is interviewing a gentleman on that you can just click on. If you go to holysoup.com, you'll get that. But the blog post is just, if it doesn't fill my pews, forget it. And here, I'm going to read it to you. John and Tammy volunteered to start a new ministry to reach out to the community. It worked. Every week they drew 20 to 30 people who experienced the love of Christ, but their church leaders shut them down. The problem? John and Tammy could not prove that any of these people from the community were migrating to the church's regular worship services. At this church, Sunday morning attendance has become the single qualifying factor for church activity or investment. Since this church is not growing, we can't afford to spend money or effort on anything that doesn't strengthen our base, a leader told John and Tammy. I've run into this line of thinking throughout my work with the church. My first youth ministry tended to attract lots of kids from the community, kids whose appearance and behavior sometimes ruffled our church board. An elder asked me, "Don't you understand we support this youth ministry for the kids in our congregation? That's who you're here for, not these kids from the community. Besides, those kids' families will never support this church." It comes down to a matter of mission. What really is the mission of the local church? Can the modern church in its present form afford to spread the love of Christ even if it gets nothing in return? Jesus calls us to love our neighbor, but what if our neighbor never enters our house of worship? It's a question that needles most churches, even if never discussed aloud. Kids Hope USA, a Christian organization that pairs churches with local public schools, provides a path for churches to love their neighbors. The program organizes adult mentors from congregations to spend an hour a week with at-risk children at local elementary schools. It's wildly successful in affecting the lives of vulnerable kids. But there are many more schools that want the program than churches willing to become involved. Churches struggle to see any worthwhile connection between classroom desks and church pews. Is our collective heartbeat for children strong enough to beat for kids who will not ever attend this church? Asked Kids Hope President David Stahl. Do we love all children, or do we only love the kids of the families who attend this church? An expert in the law wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And he goes on to tell us here a refreshing conversation with Kids Hope David Stahl in today's Holy Soup podcast. But you know, as I read that, I thought it hasn't changed. It's exactly what I faced all through ministry. This fight that whenever we wanted to move outward, it became very, very important that somehow it grew the church, that it affected the number of people coming to our church, and that it impacted in a positive way the amount of money that was being given to our church. So there we are back to nickels and noses and keeping the institution alive. And so we hold Jesus inside, saying, here's where we give him out. Come here and you can have Jesus. And we step outside, but even that is a masked means of saying, well, we're going outside so that we can get people to come inside to fill our pews and to support the ministry. Something's very not like Jesus in all of that to me. I long for us to move to this whole idea that we can join Jesus in loving and saving the world. Not that he has to come inside our institutions. We bring people to him that way. But instead, we simply are doing what he is doing in this world as the mind and the heart. I see that as so important. So I see it as people getting together who have these like interests as they're saying, we're joining Jesus and we want all of our resources to go to that. And what kind of things intrigue us? Are you the one that's seeing the mother that's out there You're saying, how do we take care of her now that her husband's deserted her and she's trying to raise her children by herself? Are you the one that's seeing villages around the world that need new farming techniques because they've never had the opportunity to learn them, perhaps? Are you the one that's saying, wow, if we can bring water to the world? Are you the one that's saying, we know how to organize projects? Are you the one that's saying, we just need to be compassionate and love the kids? What is your heart like? Where is it going? What burns inside of you? To me, I realize this, it's always this bigger picture thing. And so I'm always looking at it from this aspect of the big picture, seeing what is what we're really doing, what we really need to be doing. But oh, how I need everybody around me that has that God design that is uniquely you, that sees life from these perspectives and says, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Now, how do I get it out there? How is it that somehow what burns inside of me, what I long to see, is it climate change areas? I think that's part of God loving the world. He looks and says, we've got to treat this place in a way that makes it wonderful for not only our generation, but for future generations. Are you one that thinks ahead to future generations? Are you longing for your grandkids to have a great place to live? You will think in terms that are unique to you, that come out of your strengths. And you need to be able to place your resources and ally them together with others that have like-minded thoughts and ideas, and you can put your money and your talents and your strengths and your abilities, and you can join Jesus. I see that as somehow where we need to put our corporate thought. How do we do this together? And I would love to have as much conversation as possible around that. And how do we break away from all this invitational, attractional stuff that makes Jesus stay inside our buildings somehow, because we've got to get people in there to keep them alive, keep our programs alive.
I'm going to
Hey,
jump in.
please do.
I'm going to jump in here. It makes me think of a question that I get asked now and then, or that actually you and I have been asked now and then, and that has more of a, when I hear the question, it's immediately a guilt factor. And maybe it's because of my background too, but I grew up in a family that went to church consistently and still thinks highly of the church, and I do too. Not to discredit that at all, just a focus that has changed for me. But instead of the question, where do you go to church, or did you go to church this morning, wouldn't it be freeing and exciting to have the question be, how are you joining Jesus this week? Or what's happening in your life where you're participating with Jesus and sharing it with the community? To me, that's a much more exciting, energizing, interesting question.
What uh, what an interesting insight, Karma, because if that was correct, we would be having, I mean, if that was how it was happening out there, we would be having these conversations of what does it mean for me to join Jesus with
Yeah.
my thoughts, with my strengths, with what burns inside of me? I think our conversations, we could be passionate
And
instead of, go ahead. Let me just say this in that instead of the same type of conversations we have around the weather, we have around church. Oh, where do you attend church?
yeah.
What's the weather like in your community today?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think too, unknowingly, sometimes church becomes the crutch that we lean on. It's been an interesting journey for me since I no longer attend church. There is certainly a hole there. but it has also forced me to think about these questions. So probably on a more daily basis, I'm thinking about what am I doing today to join Jesus in what he's doing, or what am I doing day to day to join Jesus? Because I no longer can kind of put that into the church category. It's forced me to live, I think, even more focused on joining Jesus in what he's put inside of me.
Yes. I think this simply opens the conversation. I wish I could say to you that it was in my strength to just start a new organization that takes off with this and somehow it brings all the elements in. My strength seemed to be more in the seeing, more in the looking at it and trying to somehow get us to think and talk so that it builds around everyone's strengths, not my strengths. And I long for that, but I long for it to become the conversation. How do we join Jesus in loving and saving the world? And somehow we remove the icons of our faith that have been there forever, the church building, the clergy, the preaching, the worship, the way we view it when we go to church. But instead, we begin to see maybe all of those things, but we see them in terms of our purpose, joining Jesus in loving and saving the world in a real sense. I see a comment coming up, so Karma, maybe you can share that with us. I've lost Karma. I don't know if you're there, hon, or not.
Okay, is that better?
That's better. We now hear you.
Turn my mic on. The comment is, we live in a rural town with a median household income of $27K per year, and the schools have more than 80% of the kids on free or reduced price lunch. But it's almost impossible to get the prosperous churches involved in helping the poor. Jesus is very clear in calling us to help the poor, but it doesn't seem to be part of the message in many or most churches. Or the local poor are viewed as lazy, and the aid goes to the poor in other countries. So I'm looking for alternative, non-church ways to organize people to help the disadvantaged in the community. Any thoughts on this? It's a great idea.
Oh, wow. Yes, and maybe expressing once again, just very briefly, I think oftentimes the people within the church structures, within the church as we've known it forever, it isn't that they don't want to help. It's that it's always thought of within the structure. How do we help? So it's easy to give to some program that is we give to for poverty in another part of the world, and we can say that's part of our missions or part of our mission within the church that we're doing. We're giving because these poor people that live in disadvantaged areas, we give money toward them, maybe to for missionaries or maybe toward orphanages or maybe toward water or whatever it might be. And we give that way. That's an easy way for us to do it. But when it comes down to doing it at home, that tests us. Number one, we want to invite those people in, but we want to, it probably shows us for who we actually are because we want them to be people like us, that think like us. And I fought that often in the church and not with everybody, but oftentimes those that had been around the church a long time, they wanted the church to look like them. And so if the youth group perhaps was attracting kids that weren't very much like them, maybe they swore too much, maybe they were into too many different things that the church didn't agree with, and they thought the church thought was worldly, then the church being some of its leadership would be concerned that we were polluting the church, and we really need to take care of the inside of the church. I hear this all the time, still, even in our political circles, and we've got to take care of things at home here. But taking care of things at home means keeping it like we like it, not taking care of the real needs. And I would just suggest that what needs to happen is the people that are really thinking of giving their lives away and making the world better and bringing God's kingdom here, uh, and making this earth more like heaven. And I think you almost need to ally with people that want to do that. And then within that context, don't worry about whether they're church people or not church people, but instead attempting to work with people who simply have a heart for making their community a better place.
And I might add to that. It's a conversation that even Ben and I was having earlier this morning as we kind of prepared for this webinar. Is how do we find these people? Mm-hmm. I think it's been a question on our minds for quite a while. So in pertaining to that particular example, where you're looking for alternate or non-church ways to organize people to help the disadvantaged, and I don't know if this is going to be of any help or not, but are there other government agencies or even nonprofit organizations in your area doing maybe something else for the disadvantaged? Are the people doing something to provide food for the poor or clothing for the poor, maybe in a Goodwill store? Would they have some connections in there to maybe give you some insight in how we can reach these people and maybe even other people that want to do the same thing? And in our discussion this morning, we mentioned that we feel millennials are probably, their way of thinking is probably more geared towards this type of making an impact. So is there a way in your community to reach millennials? I don't know. I'm still pondering this. Are there maybe business organizations that want to give back to the community? Maybe community organizations, Chamber of Commerce or along those lines, that want to give back to not to the organization, but to the community. Might they be a path or a resource at least to maybe provide information to get further along? So those are just ideas, hopefully more of a practical sense. We have a response following up on that. It's especially hard in a rural area. Yes, that's true. There are organizations closer to Houston, but most young people leave for school and never return. Yeah, good point. And that's probably the same thing we faced when we were out in the northeastern Colorado. It's a rural area, and many of the young ones, especially the millennial age, and I would say probably all the ones that I knew that were that age when I lived out there have left the rural area. So that's very true. That's a interesting dilemma, and I'm not sure how to address that or what we can do with that yet.
And if I can say something here that I'm a little bit hesitant to say, maybe there's another place that at least works a little. In some of the older generations, I would suggest that you're going to find some in the churches, but you're going to find them oftentimes in more progressive churches, or what we would call liberal churches. And I'm hesitant to put this out there that way, but sometimes you'll find like-minded people, and at least within those congregations, the seeming willingness to let their people and maybe even encourage their people to be out um, doing what's necessary in the community to make it a better place. Um, because sometimes they're at least geared to less program within the church structure to attract, and sometimes even more given to okay, you've got to keep the resources coming in so the church can survive, but you need to go out and do things. So sometimes I think it's easier to find people to join you in those structures than it is in the more conservative structures of the church. And I'm using those terms almost politically, even though I'm using them religiously as well, the liberal versus conservative. Um, and I think you find more helpfulness in the liberal side of things on that, and less judgment perhaps toward, well, those people ought to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, um, type of approach to poverty. That's them. We don't really want to deal with them. They need to just quit being lazy or whatever that is. And that was one of the most frustrating things to deal with, expecting others to think out of what we grew up with all of our lives, and they didn't grow up. And so I don't know. These are tough, tough questions, and in rural areas, there's maybe tougher than they are even in urban areas. Any other thoughts or
We,
comments or questions?
we have another comment. You mentioned in the chapter towards the end about when we live this way, it creates natural alliances. I really like the idea of natural alliances. Natural alliances makes it more real and authentic versus me trying to fit into something, a program within the church, which I feel could be more superficial.
Can I just say a quick amen to that? Oh my goodness. The whole idea of natural alliances to me is something that's got to be there. You've got to work with people of like passion. Um, you've got to be together with people that you thoroughly enjoy working together with. I'm not sure why this screen is flashing in front of me, Carmen. Is your screen flashing in front of you?
It is like you connected to an electric outlet somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know what that's all about, but I'll keep talking in the face of that.
Maybe,
But
hon, maybe just turn off your video for a little bit and then turn it back on, see if it will reset itself. Don't turn off your audio though.
I won't. I'll do this. I'll see if I can do
Okay, there,
just
there
what
you
you're
went
saying.
away.
And
Bring it back.
on there, so we'll see if that flashing. I'm going to just turn it off,
Yeah, we'll just talk.
and I'll talk. But uh, that flashing scene made me lose my train of thought here. The natural alliances that we have. If I can be together with people that are saying, um, yes, how can we do this? How can we benefit the children that are coming to our school in poverty, and they don't have the resources that uh, our children that come from well-off homes have? And what are the things that we could do that would benefit that? What an incredible thing that would be to be together with people like that are thinking that way, especially if that's your heart. Or if you're thinking in terms of how do we stop um, this cycle of poverty in our community, um, you know, what are things we could do to stop that? Maybe you're pairing together with even people that are part of that, have been raised in that, but they would like to break the cycle of poverty. And maybe you're together with them, and now you're bringing in some business people maybe that also are saying, wow, you're talking with some of those people and they're giving you some good ideas. I would think, that's church in its very best form to me. It's kind of like we're together, and we're following Jesus and loving and saving the world. That to me would be church. I'd love to see it. I don't know if it brings any more thought that way. But any other comments or thoughts?
Here's another comment. It has to do with the questions in the discussion book. I think the second question for this reading was, do you think we need to start over? And this comment is, I don't think I look at it as really starting over, but maybe more as let's do this differently and make it real and relevant. I imagine when the church first started, it was more real and relevant. Then it progressed, in quotes, to an institution. Maybe keeping it in the not so sure how to do this realm will make it real and relevant.
Wow. Wow. I love the thought process. I have to say that inside I struggle a little with the whole idea of trying to change from the inside, even though that's what I attempted to do for so long. But I agree with that whole thought process on the level of saying, I don't want to change the hearts of people. I don't want to somehow start another institution outside of the institutions that are already there. I just simply don't want the institution to keep taking us back to we've got to keep our institutions alive. So we have to keep our resources coming in to keep them alive. If we're doing that, then we will never get to this level of joining Jesus. We will constantly keep the level of come in and find Jesus inside our institution. And I don't know how we break that mold without stepping outside of it. However, I am open to inside, outside, it doesn't matter. I'm open to simply joining Jesus, however that works. And I don't know how or what that answer will be. I love the idea that maybe we're best off not having all the answers, but always saying, am I joining Jesus in loving and saving them? Other thoughts or comments? This is wonderful conversation.
All right, I don't see anything else coming across. Okay. Thank you all for joining us again this morning.
Yes, thank you much. I turned my video back on and now it's not flashing at me. So I'm glad to hear that or to see that. And thank you so much, everybody. That was wonderful to be part with you this morning.
Again, we appreciate each of you taking time out of your Sunday mornings. I probably say that a lot, but we certainly are sincere about that.
Yes.
We know you could be doing something else, but we appreciate you joining us these Sunday mornings. And we love the conversation, the ideas. I know we don't always have, and we will never have the answers, but we certainly appreciate the conversations coming out of here. Next week, just to give you kind of a heads up, Ben had mentioned to me earlier this morning, we're going to do a little bit differently. We've been going sequentially through the book, which would make sense, but we can do this however we want. So next week we are going to do the next chapter called Simplicity, but then we're going to also include another chapter further into the book, more towards the end of the book, called Refurbishing Old Hiking Boots. And we feel those two go together well. So Simplicity and Refurbishing Old Hiking Boots.
And the chapter Simplicity, the short little chapter there, mentions the other chapters, so you won't have to remember it. If you just read that one, you'll be able to find that chapter because it mentions it in that.
And of course, we'll send out an email with those details as well. All right, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thanks.